a decade, Chicago planners have been talking about turning this abandoned elevated railway line, freight railway line, into a multi-purpose trail. Today, the Bloomingdale Trail is becoming a reality, promising to take Chicago's legacy of great parks to new heights. The park and trail will stretch some 2.5 miles through the north side neighborhoods of Logan Square, Humboldt Park, Wicker Park, and Bucktown. Engineering and preliminary designs were done earlier in 2012, and now the final Phase 2 plans are underway. That means that runners and bikers, Sunday strollers, and weekday commuters will soon be using the trail and seeing Chicago from a new vantage point, sometime by fall 2014. I'm Megan Stromberg, Senior Editor at Planning Magazine at the American Planning Association. Here to tell us some more about the Bloomingdale Trail and the planning behind it is Jamie Simone, AICP. She's the Program Director for the Urban Parks Program at the Trust for Public Land. The Trust for Public Land is the project manager working with the City of Chicago, the Chicago Park District, and Friends of Bloomingdale Trail. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So here we are near this 100-year-old freight railway line that's some 16 feet up in the air. Planners have been talking about this for a decade, but things really took off in 2004.
Right.
Can you tell me what happened then?
Sure. 2004 was when the Logan Square Open Space Plan was adopted by the city, but even prior to that, in 1998, was the City Space Plan. And that's really the first time that the Logan Square neighborhood was identified as a place that was severely lacking in open space. So in 2004, when the Logan Square Open Space Plan was done, it quantified just how lacking the neighborhood and the community area is. It's 99 acres short of the standards of what a neighborhood should have for open space based on its population. So in 2004, that plan was adopted. And then shortly after, around the same time, was when the Friends of the Bloomingdale Trail was formed, and that's really when the grassroots efforts started and people began to organize around this idea of the Bloomingdale Trail. And then in 2006 was when the Trust for Public Land became involved. Actually not far from here, just a block to the west of where we are, there's a park that's called Julio de Burgos Park, and the Trust for Public Land was involved in acquiring the land for that park in 2006. It's one of the places along the line that's identified as future access. So the Trust for Public Land purchased the land in 2006, developed the park, and now it's an active and functioning park, and in the future it will have an access ramp that takes people up to the top.
Okay. And as I understand it, the city owns the street right-of-way, but not the embankment. Tell us a little bit about the ownership of that and in fact, about the structure itself.
Sure. So you're right. It is in the Bloomingdale right-of-way. That's why it's called the Bloomingdale Trail.
Okay.
It sits in the street called Bloomingdale. And so the city owns the right-of-way, but the structure that you see behind us is owned by the Canadian Pacific Railroad. So the city has been working with them to acquire the actual structure. And it has to go through a federal abandonment process through the Surface Transportation Board. So it's a little bit of a process, but we're moving along with that as anticipated. And in terms of the structure, it is 100 years old, as you mentioned. It's like many of the elevated railroads that you see throughout Chicago. It's mostly a concrete structure. There are 38 bridges that span the distance of the almost 3 miles. It functions like a bathtub, so there are very thick concrete walls that make up the structure, and then it's filled with ballast or rocks that support the rail bed at the top.
And this project, you already mentioned it's a public-private partnership, expected to cost about $91 million. Can you tell me what's sort of the most expensive part of this project?
Well, as I mentioned, there are 38 bridges. It's a huge infrastructure project. So just when you think about 38 bridges, they all are, for the most part, structurally sound, but they do need some cosmetic work. You can see it a little bit in this structure, although this one looks pretty good. There are places where the concrete is spalling, so there's just a lot of structural concrete work that needs to be done. So 38 bridges, and then the other thing I always remind people is since it's a 3-mile structure, that's actually 6 miles of edges. So it's 6 miles of safety and guardrails that need to go up. So just between those two, I mean, that's a huge expense. And then there's landscape, there are all the access ramps that need to be built and developed. So it's just, when you think about it more like an infrastructure project instead of an open space project, I think it makes a lot more sense why it's so expensive.
And how will people get up and down?
There will be access parks, like the one I mentioned that's just to the west of us here. There will also be access ramps in the right-of-way. So there are about half and half parks and ramps in the right-of-way. So we're taking advantage of some of the existing parks that are located along Bloomingdale in the neighborhoods and changing them somewhat to be able to accommodate a ramp to get to the top. And then in other places where there is no land, this is a very dense built-out area where there is no land for a park, there will be access ramps in the street to allow people to access the top.
And what about the trail itself? What will it look like?
It's going to be, so it's 30 feet at the top, so there isn't a whole lot of space for concessions or any sort of programming or activities on the top. We will do some of that, but the top will be a 10-foot wide concrete path with two 2-foot shoulders on either side, so the total path itself will be 14 feet.
Okay.
And so then if it's 30 feet wide, the remaining 16 feet will be landscaping, benches, there will be drinking fountains on the top. In some places it does get wider, and those are the places where the landscape can be more diverse and more interesting and where there might be other opportunities. But for the most part, the top is really meant for walking and biking and running, as you've mentioned, and then there will be places where people can sit and relax and have a picnic in a little grove.
And is there also a public art component?
There will be a public art component, so it's not fully developed yet. But we do know that there will be 4 levels of art, or 4 phases of art, let's say. There's a lead artist on the design team. Her name is Frances Whitehead, and so she's the embedded artist or lead artist on the team, and so she's been working with the design team to make sure that as decisions are made, the arts are considered, and she's really brought a lot to the team in terms of how they look at the project from the larger scale. So she's involved in the design. We're also looking at commissioning artists to do work, and that will probably come sooner than some of the other artwork because we want to make sure that the bigger pieces that are more complex are incorporated into the design and into the engineering drawings that will be done by the end of the year. And then the other artworks that we plan on doing are more of an open call for artists and an RFP process where any artist could recommend something. And then, of course, as funding becomes available, those things can happen. And then, of course, programming, whether there are events or performances or other sort of classes along the trail and in the access parks.
And what's the most exciting part of this project for you?
Well, for me, I think the most exciting thing is the role that the Trust for Public Land is playing. So I've only been with the Trust for Public Land a year, and it's been amazing to me to see how integrated that we are as a private partner into the whole process. So we are the one entity that looks at everything about the project, whether it's related to design, fundraising, the arts, community interaction, working with the aldermen and other city officials. And so for me, it's allowed me to use all of my skills as a planner, and it's also forced me to push some of my skills and learn new things. So it's just been a great learning experience, and it's, I think of it as the most exciting project going on in Chicago, so it's just a thrill to be a part of it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
For more information about the project, to see its history, maps, photos, plans, go to bloomingdaletrail.org. And you can come see it for yourself in April at the 2013 National Planning Conference, which will be here in Chicago. The Bloomingdale Trail is one of dozens of mobile workshops that take planners out to the local projects to see the planning lessons behind them. For more on the conference, go to planning.org/conference.